Hello, and welcome to Life Diaries, a space where the pages of life open up, one story at a time. These are tales written by experience, spoken from the heart. Take a moment for yourself, and let's begin. Michael ambled slowly along the dusty, winding lane leading into the small provincial town with the unfamiliar name of Severovo. A business trip had brought him here. First a long flight to the regional center, then another couple of tiring hours on a bumpy commuter train. The journey was long, but Michael didn't complain. From childhood he had a passion for travel, and even business trips he perceived as an exciting adventure. Usually, his visits were connected with large cities. The company where he held the position of chief economist successfully traded household appliances. It was a thriving network with branches throughout the country, continuously expanding its borders. And now Michael had arrived in Severovo to resolve important issues related to the opening of another store here. Everything went smoothly. Matters settled, papers signed. Michael was accustomed to handling such tasks. Tomorrow morning, the commuter train would take him to the regional center, and from there a plane would deliver him home, to his native Petrovsk. The head office of their large company was located precisely there, which was a very convenient arrangement. The evening turned out to be free. Michael decided to stroll through the town, look around, perhaps find a cozy cafe and sit for a while. He liked Severovo. Quiet, peaceful. Life here, presumably, flows measuredly, unhurriedly. In such places, people usually know each other well. Michael could almost physically feel that if he were to turn into one of the courtyards, a picture from the past would appear before him. Old folks on benches discussing the latest news, children playing in the sandbox, men leaning over someone's car, women chatting by the entrance or the front garden after their housework. All this vividly reminded Michael of his own childhood. Every summer, for at least a week or two, his mother would send him to her former in-laws, his father's parents. How the boy looked forward to those days. His mother and father divorced when Michael was just a tiny tot. He, of course, didn't remember those times, but his mother held a grudge. Her husband, according to her, left her for a new woman. With her, he moved to distant Vladivostok, where her parents lived. So, he couldn't leave her parents, but us, easily, his mother exclaimed bitterly. She often returned to memories of that difficult period. And his own son he doesn't need, nor his own old parents. He's completely lost his mind over a pretty face and long legs. It pained Michael to hear such things about his father. On the other hand, his parent really didn't show any interest in him. In Vladivostok, he had other children, it seemed, a son and a daughter, meaning Michael's brother and sister. Apparently, his father had enough heirs and wasn't drawn to his eldest. Or perhaps the new wife was against contact with the child from the first marriage. Who knows? He sent alimony, but he didn't participate in his son's life at all, never even wished him a happy birthday. His paternal grandmother and grandfather lived relatively close, about 100 kilometers from Petrovsk, in a large village. They waited for their grandson to visit all year, and Michael's mother seemed not to object to these visits. But she regarded her in-laws with great caution, fearing they would turn her son against her and speak well of their son, her ex-husband. Therefore, the boy visited his relatives for only a week or two a year, during the summer holidays. And what happy days those were. Grandma and Grandpa waited for their grandson all year, preparing for his arrival. For those 2 weeks, all their attention was focused only on him. Michael literally bathed in warmth, love, and care. Delicious lunches and dinners, fishing trips with Grandpa, overnight stays in a tent in the middle of a field, swimming in the river with the local kids. If he had his way, he would spend the entire summer in the village with Grandma and Grandpa. and they would have been only too happy. Michael knew this but had to be content with little. It was good that he had even that. By the way, neither Grandma nor Grandpa ever said a bad word about their grandson's mother. On the contrary, they instilled in the boy that it was hard for his mother alone, and he should help her. But his parent often spoke unflatteringly about her in-laws. They couldn't even raise their own child properly. They never left the village their whole lives, and they speak ungrammatically. And sometimes Grandma and Grandpa told their grandson about their son's childhood, Michael's father. Usually these were cheerful stories that made the boy either smile or laugh loudly. They reminded him of the collection Dennis's Stories. Michael laughed heartily at his parents' antics and sincerely didn't understand how such a boy, cheerful, brave, capable of friendship and risk, could abandon him, his own son. Could it be he didn't even think about him? Could it be he wasn't interested in how his firstborn was doing? What he had become? Later, Michael learned that his father had tried to maintain contact with his son for a while. He called, asked to speak to Michael, sent postcards and toys. But his mother, out of resentment and a desire for revenge, gave her ex-husband not the slightest chance. She told Michael about it herself when he was already an adult. This happened the day the young man learned of his father's death. A heart attack had taken him, a man not yet old. Michael barely knew this man, but the feeling of irreparable loss weighed him down then like a concrete slab. Yes, his father hadn't been involved in his life, but Michael had supposed that in the future they would meet anyway. Talk, clear things up, maybe even start communicating. But now nothing could be fixed. It was all over. It was then, on that day, that his mother spoke well of Michael's father for the first time. It turned out that when the young couple had a baby, the inexperienced young mother was afraid to bathe him. The young father handled that. He also got up with the baby at night, seeing how exhausted his wife was during the day, and he ran to the milk kitchen, standing in line for hours after work. But she also told him about his father's attempts to communicate with Michael. "Yes, he wanted to contact you," his mother confessed, wiping her eyes with a handkerchief. "But I was so hurt by him, and I sincerely believed that nothing would work out. He's in Vladivostok. We're here, on the other side of the country. We wouldn't be able to see each other often anyway. Instead of tearing your heart and missing him, it's better not to know such a father at all." Michael forgave and understood his mother. He had always felt sorry for her his whole life. After all, she raised him alone, dedicated herself entirely to him, never remarried. Thanks to her efforts, Michael became the man he is now, wealthy and very successful. From an early age, his mother instilled in her son that he was obliged to get a higher education. She herself had finished a vocational school and worked as a seamstress in an atelier her whole life, often taking orders home. Michael liked listening to the sewing machine rattle. He could watch his mother work for a long time. It was interesting to see this amazing transformation. Just a moment ago, there was just a piece of fabric on the table. A little time passed, and it was transformed beyond recognition. Now it was a beautiful skirt, or a summer dress, or a robe. His mother was almost like a real sorceress. By the way, this work brought the small family quite good money. In childhood, Michael was never denied anything. He always had fashionable clothes, beautiful toys, a bicycle, interesting books, ice cream almost every day. He and his mother lived in a good apartment that had everything: comfortable, beautiful furniture, household appliances, even decorative figurines. Once a year, mother and son always went to the sea. Michael felt quite happy. "Study hard, son," his mother instructed her only child. "Study, get a higher education, become a big man, then we'll live well." The boy thought they lived well enough even now, but he certainly listened to his parents' words. Especially since he had always liked to study, and he was good at it. He was almost a straight-A student throughout his school years, without much effort. University life completely captivated Michael. At university, he met very interesting people. Student parties, trips to nature, joint preparation for exams, and then celebrating the end of the session. All this resembled a colorful carousel. Michael felt happy. He was in his element. His mother was a little scared by all these parties. She often warned her son against reckless actions. "Be careful, son. You know you need to be cautious. Right now, everything is good for you. A wonderful future awaits you, but it's very easy to lose everything. Very easy." Then followed lectures on the dangers of drinking, the possibility of a young man getting into trouble or being beaten, the danger of getting too carried away with parties and failing the next session. And his mother was also afraid of greedy girls who, of course, dreamed of getting pregnant by promising young men and thereby ruining their lives at the very beginning. Michael was amused by these maternal fears. The son perfectly understood and controlled himself. The young man tried to calm his parent, to explain to her that he had a head on his shoulders, but she simply couldn't understand that her son had grown up, had become almost an adult. It always seemed to her that she had to protect him, lay straw wherever possible, be near him. Michael, remembering his student years, smiled. His mother is the same now, still worrying about her only son, still trying to arrange his life. Now his parent has a new obsession. Her son, a grown, established man, is almost 40, and he is still not married. It's not right. His mother persistently tried to set up her long, independent son with the daughters of her friends and acquaintances. Good girls from respectable families. It was funny and at the same time maximally awkward. Michael wasn't angry with his mother. He treated her concern condescendingly, understanding. His parent simply wants the best for her son, the best as she understands it. Michael himself was quite comfortable living as a bachelor. Is it bad? You're only responsible for yourself. You do what you want. You don't report to anyone. But you couldn't explain that to his mother. Michael, of course, had brief romances from time to time. Some of his partners tried to ring the gentleman, but nothing came of it. Michael firmly stopped such attempts and immediately broke off the relationship. He didn't need a family. Why? What if he wouldn't be a good husband and father? There are few happy couples. Mostly everyone is constantly arguing, sorting things out, dividing something. And look how many divorces there are. Adults can't figure things out among themselves, and then the children suffer. No, Michael didn't want that for himself. And it's not all that simple. Once, many years ago, Michael was sure he had met the love of his life. These were sincere and very strong feelings. Michael felt then as if the whole world had transformed, become brighter, friendlier, warmer. And then came disappointment and almost physical pain. The young man didn't want to live. He barely pulled through then, thanks to his mother, by the way, who found a good psychotherapist. It's scary to think what might have happened if not for that specialist, who, by the way, turned out to be a professional in his field. No, Michael didn't want such upheavals anymore, so he consciously chose a life where work occupied the central place. True, his mother still couldn't come to terms with this. She wanted to see her son arm in arm with a wife, surrounded by sweet little ones. But never mind, she would get over it somehow. Michael himself didn't understand why all these thoughts and memories suddenly overwhelmed him now. It all started with the provincial town of Severovo, reminding him a little of his grandmother and grandfather in the village, his father's parents. They have been gone for a long time, passed away in the same year, practically one after the other. His mother was still loudly indignant then that Michael's father didn't even come to say goodbye to his parents. dumping all the trouble on his brother's shoulders. Only later did Michael learn that during that period his father had serious financial problems, and he wouldn't have been able to get from Vladivostok to his small homeland so quickly anyway. And then his mother painted a vivid picture for her son of his parents' terrible deed, not holding back on expressions. Michael sighed. With years, he realized more and more clearly that his mother, his beloved, loving mother, who did everything for her son, she pressured her only child, shaped his opinion of relatives, molded the boy to suit herself. Because of this, in childhood and youth, Michael often felt confused, bewildered. But what's the point of talking about it now? He didn't hold a grudge against his mother. On the contrary, he felt gratitude towards her and pitied her. After all, not everyone is capable of laying their whole life on the altar of their child's future happiness. His mother had to work hard, solve endless problems on her own. Michael understood this perfectly, and therefore, having become an adult, he called his mother every day, often visited her, gave his parent gifts without any reason. He understood. She vitally needed the attention of her grown son and his conscious gratitude too. His feet carried Michael to the station square. This was not surprising. In small towns, all roads lead to the station. Well, he could have dinner somewhere here. There was probably a suitable cafe nearby, or maybe even a canteen. For some reason, Michael suddenly craved homemade food, the kind you can only find in canteens. Just as if on cue, a sign caught the man's eye. Canteen. Michael quickly walked towards the eatery. He needed to cross the square with a fountain. It was by this very fountain that a trembling, somehow dry and cracked voice stopped the man. "Young man, it's awkward to ask, but there's no other way. Please help if you can." Michael turned around and saw an old woman, stooped, wrinkled, dressed in an old faded dress, a colorful headscarf on her head, dusty, worn-out sneakers on her feet. But her eyes, the blue eyes clearly belonged to a woman not quite so old. They looked timid and somehow guilty. Perhaps she was a beggar, the same age as Michael's mother. Just this way of life had aged her, turned her into a stooped old woman. Of course. The man nodded and began rummaging in his pockets. Had he brought cash with him? Michael usually paid by card, but this time he found several 1,000-ruble bills. Without hesitation, he immediately gave them to the woman because, well, it was clear that she was in great need. There was so much hope in her eyes. The old woman didn't look like arrogant professional beggars. "This? All for me?" The stranger was surprised, seeing the bills in Michael's hand. "Yes," the man nodded. "Oh, thank you, dear. God bless you for your generosity and kindness. I'm not asking for myself, you understand?" Michael wanted to continue his journey, but he saw that it was important for the old woman to explain herself, or even justify herself to him, and so the man didn't rush. Let her speak her mind. It wasn't difficult for him to listen, and it would make the person feel better. "I have a grandson, Stevie. His mother, my daughter, died. So I'm raising him as best I can. We don't have enough money. I can't work anymore. I've become old and sick. So I have to ask for help from kind people at the station. Don't think I'm asking for money for drink. And I'm not lazy. I've worked hard all my life, as a cleaner. If it weren't for my illness, I'd still be working now. I wouldn't need help. But I can't. For Stevie's sake, I'm holding out my hand like this. He's growing. He needs to be fed well, clothed, educated." "Ah, you have a difficult fate." Michael shook his head. "You're doing great not abandoning the boy. How old is he, Stevie?" The old woman smiled. It was clear she enjoyed talking about her grandson. "He's 12, handsome and smart, he learns easily, he has a clear head. But he suffers because of our dire situation. He sees how hard it is for me and tries to earn money. Sometimes he washes cars in the parking lot. Sometimes he mows lawns for people. He gets pennies, or sometimes nothing at all. People are different. Boys are often cheated. And he spends a lot of time, comes home tired, then there's no time for homework. So his studies are slipping. I tell him, "Study, Stephen. Your main job now is studying. You don't need to work so much, I'll manage. And you need to study, to get on your feet later." But he doesn't listen to me. He doesn't listen. He doesn't listen, Michael repeated. The story had touched him somehow. The man wanted to know more about the old woman's life with her grandson. "Is it hard for you with him?" "No. What are you saying?" The beggar woman threw up her hands. "You misunderstood. Stevie is a very good boy. He takes care of me, does everything around the house. He only doesn't listen to me about continuing to work. It's hard for him. My heart breaks for him. If only Stevie could be in a good family. He's talented, he could amount to something, and I'm afraid he'll ruin all his abilities with me. That's what I'm worried about." With these words, the old woman adjusted her headscarf. When the woman raised her hand, the sleeve of her calico dress lifted slightly, and Michael's eyes saw a bracelet, a thin gold chain with 3 heart-shaped pendants. The man stared in amazement at the exquisite jewelry. No, he wasn't struck by the mere fact of an expensive item on a poor old woman's wrist. It was simply that many years ago he had ordered exactly the same bracelet from a jewelry workshop for a girl he considered his soulmate, with whom he wanted to live a long life and grow old in a cozy house somewhere by the sea. And she, this young beauty, became the greatest disappointment in his life. There, on these heart-shaped pendants, their names were engraved: Michael and Sarah. And the third heart was inlaid with a diamond. Michael had spent all his savings on the jewelry then. What was this? Just a similar bracelet? Or that very one? It wasn't hard to find out, but it felt strange, almost scary. The old woman caught Michael's gaze and smiled. "I know what you thought. She's pretending to be a beggar, but she's wearing gold. But you're mistaken. This is a memory, my daughter's memory. In the most difficult times, I couldn't part with this item. Sarah loved this bracelet so much it meant a lot to her. That's why I haven't taken it off since that terrible day, since Sarah—" Michael felt as if he had been doused with a bucket of ice water. His heart first clenched, then began to beat faster, his temples pounded, and colored spots blurred before his eyes. Sarah, the girl Michael wanted to tie his life to, for whom he had ordered the bracelet back then, her name was also Sarah. So, could it be? No, it simply couldn't be. "Do you have time now?" Michael asked. "Yes," the old woman replied. She looked at the man suspiciously, who had first easily given her a huge amount of money, in her understanding, and now was acting so strangely. "What is it? We need to talk," Michael said. I think I once knew your daughter. This bracelet, and her name, everything matches. Maybe we can sit down?" "All right." The old woman nodded and headed towards an empty bench in front of the fountain. Michael trudged after her. Michael met Sarah during the summer holidays, before his final 5th year. He had come to the university, which had become like a second home, for mandatory work duty. The building had just been renovated, and students were washing paint off the corridors along with a professional crew. Sarah was part of this renovation crew, a fragile, big-eyed girl. Michael noticed her immediately. Cheerful, pure, bright. There was something so captivating in her gaze. The young man constantly tried to catch her eye. When he succeeded, Sarah would blush and lower her lashes, and Michael felt happy. His heart would sweetly stop every time he was near this wonderful girl. And this happened often. Michael deliberately lingered nearby. It was surprising that no one else noticed Sarah's unique beauty. Not even Roger, Michael's classmate, the universally acknowledged local Don Juan, who never missed a beautiful woman, he didn't pay any attention to Sarah at all. Well, all the better. Because Roger knew how to handle girls. A few words, and any beauty was his. Michael didn't want Sarah to become one of Roger's trophies. Seeing Sarah dragging a heavy bucket of water, Michael dropped everything and was by her side. "Give it here!" The young man snatched the heavy load from Sarah's fragile, graceful hands. "Where do you need it?" "To the second floor?" The girl didn't argue. They talked on the way. Sarah turned out to be a simple and modest girl. It was easy and pleasant for Michael to talk to her. Sarah, it seemed, also liked the handsome, smiling young man. The student's work duty lasted a couple of hours, while the renovation crew worked a full day. Michael stayed with Sarah on the day they met, and he helped her until the end of her shift. He didn't want to part with her even for a few hours. After the girls' workday ended, the young people went to the cinema. Michael held Sarah's hand in his palm and understood that right now his life was taking a serious turn. Nothing like this had ever happened to him before. Never had another person meant so much to him. Michael and Sarah started dating. Gradually, the young people became dear to each other, getting to know each other more closely. Both were raised without fathers. Sarah didn't know hers at all and seemed not to worry about it. Both had only mothers. But while Michael's mother did everything to ensure her son had a higher education and a prosperous, happy life, Sarah's mother didn't have such an opportunity. She worked as a cleaner, earning pennies. Sarah helped her from an early age. After finishing 9th grade, the girl went to a construction technical school. She didn't even dream of higher education. "I need to work, money is needed, no time to sit around in classrooms." After finishing the technical school, the girl got a job in a renovation crew and finally started earning a salary. Now there was more money in their small family, and this was very timely, as mother and daughter had to rent an apartment. They didn't have their own place, and prices were rising quickly. So they lived. They didn't starve, it seemed, but the money was only enough for the bare necessities. Michael was sure that he and Sarah would get married. He saw no other destiny for himself. Sarah was completely his person, so sensitive, so kind and fragile. Michael wanted to protect and cherish her. She had a difficult job. When they got married, Sarah wouldn't do this, dragging heavy buckets, breathing paint fumes. No, Michael would have a good profession, and consequently, he could count on a high-paying job. The husband would fully support the family, and Sarah could do whatever she wanted. Manage the house, the family, or go to study. Of course, Michael shared his thoughts with his mother. He was generally used to telling her everything. "Have you lost your mind?" His parent, hearing the revelations of her only son, was horrified. "How many times have I told you about this? You're a guy from a well-off family, a student of a prestigious university with good prospects. We have a large apartment after all. Do you even imagine that girls from poor families hunt for guys like you? Do you know how many are eager to ride into a comfortable life on someone else's back?" "No, Mom. Sarah, she's completely different. You'll understand everything when you meet her." "You don't understand much. There will be wagons and a small cartload of Sarahs instead of this Sarah in your life." "What wedding? You need a completely different girl, from a good family, with a higher education. And these provincial girls, they want one thing. They'll have a child by a good guy. And then, manipulating the child, they'll twist him around their finger. And his relatives, by the way, too." No matter how Michael tried to make his mother understand that Sarah was a completely different matter, she didn't want to listen. In the end, the young man decided, let it be. Even if his mother didn't agree with his choice, he would still do everything his own way. True, the wedding would have to be postponed now. His mother would never agree for Michael to bring his wife into their shared apartment. She was set against Sarah. So, living together wouldn't lead to anything good. There was only one way out: get on his feet as soon as possible, earn enough for separate housing, and only then propose to his beloved. Michael couldn't imagine his life without Sarah anymore. Next to her, he felt strong, almost omnipotent, and at the same time very vulnerable. A strange feeling. His heart belonged to Sarah. She could do whatever she wanted with him. But the girl treated Michael very gently, took care of him, constantly tried to make him laugh. And when Sarah rested her head on the young man's shoulder, in those moments he felt like the happiest person in the world. The offer of an international internship came to Michael unexpectedly. He was just finishing his thesis. There was very little time left until graduation. Finally, the young man would have his diploma. He would be able to work, to earn money. Michael planned to start saving for housing immediately. Even if it was a small apartment in an old building somewhere on the outskirts for now, the main thing was that there would be a place where he and Sarah could start their family life. Quiet, calm, measured, and undoubtedly very happy. One day, the rector summoned Michael. It turned out that a foreign partner was offering the university a profitable contract. They needed bright graduates, students. He would have to spend 3 years in a foreign country and work hard. But the salary? The salary offered was such that a young specialist couldn't find it in the city. Michael immediately calculated in his head. This money would be enough for a very decent apartment. And the experience gained abroad would increase his demand as a specialist. Upon returning, Michael would easily find a high-paying job. Of course, the young man gladly agreed. True, he would have to part with Sarah for 3 long years. They wouldn't see each other. They would have almost no opportunity to communicate, only perhaps by correspondence. And for 3 whole years. A monstrous period. On the other hand, this was the only chance to quickly get on his feet. He had to endure, to survive this separation. This was the real test of feelings. Michael was sure that they would both pass it with dignity. Sarah was upset when she learned about her beloved's plans, even cried a little, but she understood that it was the only way out of their difficult situation. Before leaving, Michael wanted to give his beloved a special gift. Something memorable, something she would look at and remember him. That's when the young man went to the jewelry workshop. He decided to order an exclusive piece of jewelry for his beloved, one that no one else had. Together with the master, the young man decided it should be a bracelet. Elegant, fragile, like Sarah herself, with original heart-shaped pendants, with engraving. On 2 of the heart-shaped pendants, Michael asked to engrave their names, and the master adorned the 3rd with an exquisite stone, a diamond. The master named the price for materials and work. It was all of Michael's savings, but the young man parted with them without any regret. The bracelet was ready in a week. Michael, seeing it, sincerely admired it. Yes, this was exactly what he wanted. Not just a bauble, but a piece of jewelry with meaning and a special energy. Sarah's eyes lit up with joy at the sight of the gift. True, she immediately became embarrassed. It must be incredibly expensive. A gold piece, and custom-made, too. You deserve the very best, Michael smiled, and you'll have all of it when I return. Let the bracelet remind you of me in my absence and bring you joy. I won't take it off at all, Sarah promised and hugged her beloved. His mother, unlike Sarah, received the news of her son's internship with joy. What a smart boy you are. She smiled proudly, looking at Michael. It was you they offered this internship to, not just anyone. That means they value you. And the trip will be good for you. You'll get that poor little bride of yours out of your head, and your mind will be clear. Michael didn't argue with his mother then. No, he wouldn't forget his beloved girl there, in a foreign land, for a minute. Moreover, this entire internship was solely for her sake. Without the trip, they wouldn't get their own home so quickly. And this way, very soon Michael would become an independent man, ready to start a family. For happiness, he would have to work hard. And Michael worked his fingers to the bone. It was hard. He had to deal with complex financial reports, overcome the language barrier, learn everything anew. But Michael managed. He had a goal, and he was moving towards it with a confident and firm step. The young man often called his mother, dialing her from the office or the hotel reception. She was so happy with these calls, showering her son with compliments and questions. But with Sarah, he had to correspond. She didn't have a landline phone at home, so Michael had nowhere to call to talk to his beloved. He missed her voice so much. He started yearning for it almost immediately after he left. The correspondence didn't last long either. After a couple of months, letters stopped arriving for the girl. Michael himself wrote almost every week. But did Sarah receive his messages? Probably not. Otherwise, she would have definitely replied. "Mom, do you know what happened?" Michael wondered during a phone conversation with his parent. "Do you know why Sarah isn't answering my letters?" "How should I know?" his mother replied reluctantly. "Maybe your flighty girl is fooling around with someone? That's how they are." "You're not telling me something. I'll drop everything and fly home tomorrow. I need to make sure she's all right." "Don't even think about it." His mother was scared. "Everything is fine with her. She's waiting for you. It's just that there's trouble with international mail right now. We have temporary problems with international communication in our country. That's why letters aren't reaching here. And they're not going out from here either. So don't worry. Just work calmly." It was hard living these years without any contact with his beloved. His mother spoke reluctantly about Sarah, preferring to steer the conversation to other topics. When her son insisted too much, she would report some facts, saying everything was fine, Sarah was alive and well, working. Michael often asked his mother to arrange a phone call with Sarah. He wanted to hear her voice, find out how his beloved was doing. But his parent was adamant. "No Sarahs will be in my house," his mother invariably replied. Michael was angry with his mother, but understood that she had the right to say and think so. After all, it was her apartment, and she wasn't obligated to let in a person she couldn't stand. Michael had no doubt. When he returned home and married Sarah, his mother would have to meet the girl. And then his mother would understand what a wonderful person Sarah was. She would accept her. She would definitely change her opinion of her. That's how it would be. The sooner, the better. 3 years of internship, on one hand, flew by quickly. Michael had a lot of work, many complex and interesting tasks. This was engaging and brought in good money. On the other hand, 3 years without his beloved seemed like an eternity to Michael. He missed Sarah's voice, her eyes, her scent, her touch. He dreamed of her, saw her in girls he met. Michael didn't look at anyone else during this time. Although he had options, many young female employees worked at the company who were not against starting a relationship with a hard-working, smart young man. But Michael thought only of Sarah. He didn't need anyone else. His mother, by the way, hoped that her son would find a decent girl in his new place. She often asked Michael if he had met anyone. Each time he had to disappoint her. Why would he need anyone else? Sarah. That was his destiny. The internship period was nearing its end. Michael had enough money in his account, enough for a very good apartment in Petrovsk, and even some left over for a car. In the week preceding his departure, Michael wandered through local supermarkets and chose gifts for Sarah: a beautiful dress, unusual jewelry, even toys. It was pleasant to guess what would bring joy to his beloved. His mother met Michael at the airport. In 3 years, she had changed a lot. She had gained weight, had more wrinkles, and her hair had more gray. Michael was happy to see his dear person. Mother and son hugged tightly and went home. "You've grown up a lot." His mother didn't take her eyes off her son. "You've become a real man, so handsome, tall." Michael smiled. He felt the same way. Youth was behind him. He had become a completely adult man, fully ready to start a family. The man and his mother didn't talk about Sarah anymore. What was the point? Mentioning this girl always made his parent lose her temper. The young man was in a hurry to get home. He wanted to leave his things, take a shower, and rush to her, to Sarah. She was probably not home now. It was the middle of the day. Sarah was most likely at work. Then he would ask her mother where to find the girl. Michael couldn't wait until the end of the workday. He had dreamed of this meeting for 3 whole years. He definitely couldn't bear another few hours. He needed to see her, hear her voice, look into her eyes. "Are you going to see her?" his mother asked Michael when he was already near the front door. The young man didn't deny it. To her. "Well, good luck," his parent said with a contemptuous twist of her lips. Michael had never been to Sarah's place, but he knew the address well. He had walked her to her building entrance many times. The girl lived on Zavodskaya Street, in a former barrack. It was a 2-story, dilapidated wooden building. The disadvantaged area had become even more neglected over these 3 years. Mountains of garbage around, dusty, unpaved paths, thickets of weeds everywhere. Michael climbed the creaky stairs to the 2nd floor. This was the right door. First, he pressed the doorbell, but realizing it didn't work, he knocked resolutely. The door didn't open immediately, about 2 minutes later. An elderly man stood on the threshold in a greasy robe, with a keen, unkind gaze and tufts of gray hair. Who was this? Sarah said she lived only with her mother. Who was this old man? "Good afternoon," Michael greeted politely. "I would like to speak with one of the residents of the apartment." "He is before you, in person." The man smiled proudly. "What did you want to talk about? I won't invite you in. My grandchildren are here now. They're sleeping. I wouldn't want to wake them." Of course," Michael quickly agreed. An elderly man? Grandchildren? Maybe he had the wrong door. "Well, what is it about?" The elderly man waited and seemed to be losing patience. "You see, I'm looking for my girlfriend, Sarah. I must have the wrong apartment, but she definitely lives somewhere nearby. Somewhere close. Could you tell me?" "Your neighbors, apparently." "Sarah?" The man shook his head. "Sarah and Val, her mother? Yes, they lived here, but they moved away somewhere, and in a hurry. This is my apartment. They rented it from me. I don't know why they suddenly packed up so unexpectedly, as if they were running from someone. Well, it was convenient for me. My son had children, twins right away, so they moved here. This apartment is more spacious after all. They left." "And you don't happen to know where or why?" "No, they didn't report to me, and I didn't ask. I don't need unnecessary information. I'm not used to prying into people's lives at all." The mother and daughter packed their things in an evening, paid me, and that was it. From their conversation, I understood they were going to another city somewhere. Which one exactly, I don't know. Michael understood even then that he had lost Sarah. Lost her forever. But the young man didn't give up easily. He started a whole investigation. He even went to Sarah's former workplace, found her friends there, talked to them. They knew nothing about where Sarah and her mother had gone. She hadn't talked to them about her plans. Sadie became strange then, even long before that move. Susie, Sarah's colleague and friend, readily shared her memories. "At first, she was very sad when you flew away for your internship. Then suddenly she became somehow joyful. But it was a quiet joy. She glowed from within. We thought, did she fall in love again? But she denied it. Something was definitely happening with her. I know her well. Then something happened again. Sadie was pale, frightened, bewildered. I tried to find out what was wrong, if I could help her in any way. I felt sorry for her. But you couldn't get a word out of her with pliers. And then suddenly this departure. Nothing is clear about her, in short. Having found out nothing from Sarah's acquaintances, Michael went to the police with a missing person report for his beloved girl. They just laughed at him there. They explained that Sarah and her mother were adults and could move freely around the world without notifying anyone. Maybe she ran away from you? A young man in uniform smirked, looking at the bewildered Michael. She doesn't want to communicate anymore, and you don't understand words. So she left. It happens. You're not a relative of hers. I can't accept your application. There are no grounds. After some time, Michael lost hope. He understood that he would never find Sarah now in the vastness of the huge country. His beloved girl and her mother never had their own place, so they could easily move to any city. Trying to find them was like searching for a needle in a haystack. But why? Why did Sarah do this? Did she really fall out of love and run away? Or did something happen in her life? What difference did it make now? It was clear they would never see each other again. And that's when the young man fell into despair. While he was running around the city, doing something, searching, hoping, it seemed to him that everything was still fixable. But now, Michael knew. Sarah had disappeared forever. His plans for a wedding, children, a long life together were not destined to come true. Then what was the internship for? What did he save money for? Why did he leave it all? Michael suddenly realized that he didn't want to live at all. What was the point? Sarah wasn't there anyway, and of course, she wouldn't be. Michael now pondered the reasons for her disappearance from morning till night. He lay in his room, the door closed, listening to sad music and thinking. Maybe Susie was right? Sarah met someone else? Or simply couldn't wait for her beloved for so long and left to seek a new life because staying here was unbearable? In any case, she easily erased Michael from her destiny, didn't even leave him a note or a message. She could have sent it through Susie, or through his mother, her almost mother-in-law. Did Michael mean nothing to her then? Sarah was the whole world to the young man, the meaning of his life, and he was just an acquaintance to her, someone nice to spend time with. He didn't want to live. Michael ate almost nothing, didn't answer numerous calls, didn't talk to his anxious mother, who constantly tried to reach her adult child. "Why are you suffering? What are you worried about?" she asked. Well, the girl didn't wait. It happens. And it happens all the time. She went on with her life. You go on with yours. This is a normal situation, and you're making a universal tragedy out of it. Perhaps his mother wanted to alleviate her son's condition, but her lamentations only made him feel worse. Mom. She didn't understand anything. She simply couldn't look into Michael's heart and understand what was happening there. And there was so much pain, so much despair and black hopelessness, that Michael couldn't imagine how to continue existing with such a burden. In the end, his mother found him a psychotherapist. This happened after he refused food for 2 whole days. The woman couldn't even make Michael touch food. That's when she became truly scared. She was afraid her son would simply die. A short, elderly man came to their apartment in a simple black t-shirt and jeans. He was probably just over 50, with noble gray hair at his temples, strong, horn-rimmed glasses. His mother had called the specialist to the house because she understood that the chances of her son voluntarily going to a clinic were minimal. Michael had no idea how much effort it cost his mother to arrange this visit. And money, by the way. This man. He just sat nearby and said something in a low voice. Michael didn't listen at first. Then he became interested. The psychotherapist somehow miraculously helped him. Apparently, he was a professional in his field. After several sessions, Michael felt like a completely different person. He understood that life goes on even without Sarah, that there were many other interesting and important things in the world. It was selfish and foolish to spend time like this, in sorrow, lying on the bed and doing nothing. The girl's disappearance was her choice and her right. No person is another's property. If she wanted to, she left. She knew where to find Michael. If she had the slightest desire, Sarah would have already appeared. It couldn't be said that Michael felt happy. No, the longing for his beloved was still very strong. But at least he had energy again. The young man understood that it was time to act. Find a job, somehow settle into this life. The psychotherapist advised him to finish the course of treatment at the clinic, but Michael refused. He felt that he had received enough help, and now he could handle it himself. Finding a job was not difficult. With his experience and track record, Michael was hired as a senior economist at a local household appliance trading company. The salary was immediately more than decent. The young man was also promised career growth if he proved himself. And Michael planned to prove himself. How he planned to. He had to distract himself from sad thoughts somehow. If he stopped, the black melancholy would drag him back into its swamp. The young man felt this. Michael worked hard and quickly achieved success. Life gradually changed from black and white to color. First dull gray, then bright, full, vibrant. When there is money, the world acquires a special attractiveness. Michael could now afford a lot, and did. Trips to exotic corners of the planet, vacations at expensive resorts, beautiful cars. And girls, of course. A young, handsome, wealthy man naturally had no shortage of choices. His mother seemed happy for her son at first. She had truly feared for his life then. The sight of the listless man spending days on the sofa behind the closed door of his room frightened the woman. But after years, Michael's overly free lifestyle began to bother her. "You need to get married, son." The man heard this phrase from his mother more and more often each year. But he couldn't agree with his parent. Michael was fine as he was. He felt free and almost happy. Serious relationships. He had already been through that, and certainly didn't want a repeat. If you love someone, get attached to someone so strongly that you can't breathe without that person, you become very fragile and vulnerable. Michael still remembered the pain that Sarah's disappearance had caused him. No thanks. Enough. Love, serious relationships. In Michael's mind, all this meant the end of freedom. A person in love no longer belongs to himself. The object of his feelings can do whatever they want with him, even twist him around their finger. Therefore, at his age, Michael didn't even think about marriage. And there was still plenty of time ahead. He wasn't even 40 yet. He would have time later somehow if he wanted to. His mother scared him with lonely old age and the thought that there would be no one to give him a glass of water before death. This argument didn't convince the man at all. He playfully replied to his mother that he wasn't sure if he would even want to drink at such a moment, and it was foolish to give up a happy bachelor life for a vague prospect, especially since he had plenty of female company. Michael tried not to remember Sarah, but she still periodically surfaced in his thoughts, sometimes appearing in dreams, sometimes seen in girls walking towards him. The man had learned to cope with his emotions. He hadn't completely erased the once-loved girl from his heart, but now Sarah didn't prevent him from living and enjoying life. Michael had managed to leave her in the past, or so it seemed to him. All these memories and thoughts flashed through Michael's mind at the moment he walked with the old woman towards the bench in front of the fountain. The man saw the bracelet, and in an instant, all his feigned nonchalance vanished. He felt again that he still yearned for Sarah, and he clearly realized that he would give up all his wealth and easily part with his notorious freedom, just to have her near. Only the old woman had said that Sarah was no longer alive. Michael was afraid to even think about it, hoping that he had misunderstood something, or that there had been some mistake. "So you say you knew my Sarah?" The old woman looked at Michael intently. "Yes," the man nodded. "This bracelet, I think I recognize it. Can I look closer?" The old woman silently took the jewelry off her wrist and held it out to Michael. All this time, she didn't take her eyes off him. The man's breath caught when the bracelet was in his hands. It was it, that very one. There was no doubt. An exquisite, original item. And yet Michael looked closely at the heart-shaped pendants. Yes, it was true. On 2 of them, names were engraved, and the 3rd was adorned with a diamond. "I am that Michael." The man handed the bracelet back to its new owner. "I gave this bracelet to your daughter many years ago." "So that's who you are?" The old woman shook her head. "Sarah was so in love with you then. It had never happened to her before. She was flying on wings. I told her not to get involved with such... With such what?" Michael didn't understand. "Sons of rich parents." "Rich. We weren't rich then. My mother raised me alone, just like you raised Sarah. But still, you were not our equal. You studied at university. Your mother earned well and considered everyone poorer not a match for her son." "Maybe she was right, I don't know. Only one trouble. She went against your love with Sarah." "I don't understand anything." Michael desperately wanted the old woman's face, Sarah's mother's face, to soften just a little. She was clearly offended by Michael. But why? He had gone on that internship for their happiness, worked there for 3 years from dawn till dusk, earned money for an apartment, wanted to propose to his beloved, but couldn't find her in Petrovsk, and later couldn't even find a trace of her. It was Sarah who disappeared, Sarah who ran away from him. "You don't understand?" The old woman's eyes seemed to see right through Michael. It was a carefully studying gaze. "Well, maybe you've forgotten? Or you didn't know anything?" Michael just shrugged. "I looked for her," the man said. "When I returned, I looked for Sarah everywhere. I went to your place, but other people were living there already. I tried to find out something about Sarah at her former job, even wanted to file a missing person report, but they refused me. No one could answer where Sarah had disappeared to. No one." "Did you talk to your mother?" the old woman clarified. "Yes, she wasn't aware either." Michael understood from the words and expression of his interlocutor that his mother was somehow involved in this story. Nothing could be changed or fixed now, but anxiety was rising in his heart. Michael was worried. His heart felt like it would leap out of his chest. Was he about to learn the truth? The truth he had sought for so long? The old woman fidgeted with the bracelet on her wrist and looked somewhere into the distance. Her gaze was slightly clouded. She must have been transported to the past, reliving some important events for her. Michael wanted to bring her out of this stupor. It was important for him to know the truth, to hear Sarah's story as soon as possible. All these years, the man had lived in full confidence that he had left the situation in the past. He had fun, enjoyed all possible pleasures in life, worked hard. And now a chance meeting had changed everything, brought to the surface feelings and emotions he had hidden even from himself for so long. Michael felt lost and vulnerable again. He felt physically pained again by the impossibility of taking Sarah's hand, of looking into her eyes. It was important for the man to hear as soon as possible what had happened after he left the country. But the old woman sat, her lips stubbornly pursed, and looked into the distance. And Michael didn't dare to disturb her. She was an elderly woman. She had been through something very terrible and difficult. He had to give her time to collect her thoughts. Sarah, she loved you very much. You were the most important person in the world to her. The old woman finally began her story. I immediately noticed something was wrong with her. She started staying late at work too often. And she came home so happy, glowing all over. It was immediately clear to me that a young man was involved. I didn't pry into my daughter's soul. I knew when the time came, she would tell me herself. I only asked her to be careful. I thought someone from her crew had started courting her. And then this is how it turned out. Valerie raised her daughter alone. She was originally from a village, but Val didn't want to live in her small homeland. The girl put a lot of effort into breaking free from there and settling in the city. It didn't turn out exactly as she had initially dreamed, of course, but it was still better than living in a village civilization. Val planned to enter a technical school after school. Nothing came of it. It turned out that it wasn't such a simple matter to become a student, even of a not particularly prestigious vocational school, if you didn't have connections and money. Val didn't pass the competition, but she wasn't too upset. She would stay in the city anyway. She had money for the first time. Her parents had provided it. Pennies, of course, but her mother and father had given their daughter everything they could, and Val appreciated it. The money was enough to rent a room in a dormitory, and then the young girl got a job as a cleaner in a small shop in the courtyard. She knew how to handle a mop from a young age. The work was familiar to her. That's how Valerie got her own source of income, and quite a good one compared to village wages. The following year, Val tried to enroll again, and again failed. The girl cried then, despaired, and decided, well, it's not meant to be, probably. So, let everything go as it goes. She had a job, she had housing, even if it was rented, so she would get by somehow. Years passed. Val grew up, and from an awkward teenager, she turned into a pretty young woman. Men started looking at her. Val began to think about a family. She wanted to take care of children and a husband, keep the apartment clean and cozy, cook delicious meals for her household. You wouldn't try especially hard for yourself, wouldn't cook rich cabbage soup, bake pies. It was different with a husband and children. You would always want to please them. And then a suitable candidate came along, Lenny Smith, a loader at the shop. Handsome, cheerful, not discouraged. Of course, not an oligarch, but Val wasn't a princess either. The girl was well aware that a professor's son or a young millionaire wasn't in her future. But with Lenny, you wouldn't be lost or bored. He was also from the village, so they had a lot in common and interesting things to talk about. Lenny was hardworking and reliable. With him, it was like being behind a stone wall. Lenny didn't make her wait. He quickly proposed to his beloved. They had a purely symbolic wedding, without a procession of decorated cars, a crowd of guests, a toastmaster. They didn't have the money for it. But Val did have a white dress, though not a lush floor-length one, without a veil, just a light, pretty snow-white sundress. The young couple sat in a restaurant with a couple of friends and the bride's parents, celebrated the event in a small circle, and went their separate ways. Lenny had been an orphan since he was 12, raised by his father's sister's family. The boy didn't get much love and attention there. They raised him to adulthood and, with a sense of duty fulfilled, pushed him into independent life. So the young man managed as best he could. Valerie dreamed that now their happy life would begin. It would definitely be easier to make their way together. They could do it. They no longer just rented a room in a dormitory, but a whole separate one-room apartment. They could afford it with 2 salaries. Leonard made far-reaching plans. He was going to buy his own housing. Val looked at her husband with hope and pride. If Lenny said they would have their own apartment, then it would happen. He wouldn't talk idly like that. However, the newlyweds' plans were not destined to come true. Leonard tried to earn a penny wherever he could. He worked odd jobs as a laborer on construction sites and helped unload wagons at the station. He didn't get enough sleep, didn't eat enough. When his wife, feeling sorry for her husband, persuaded Leonard to give up another part-time job, he just smiled. When we earn enough for an apartment, then I'll lie on the sofa in front of the TV after work and annoy you. But for now, I can't. Val felt sorry for her husband. She saw that he was very tired, had lost weight. His face was gray from lack of sleep, with dark circles under his eyes. The young woman's heart sensed that this wouldn't end well. And so it happened. The misfortune occurred at night when Val was sleeping soundly at home. Her husband had gone for another odd job and was supposed to return in the morning, but he didn't come. Val became worried and went to the station. She knew that Leonard was supposed to unload a freight train. That's where they told her everything. It turned out that Leonard had already finished his part of the work. He had even been paid. The man was going home, but for some reason, he walked along the tracks and didn't hear the approaching train. And the engineer noticed the man sitting on the tracks too late in the dark. It's unclear why he was sitting there and didn't move. Didn't he see or hear the train? The worker who told Val this story wondered. But Valerie understood everything. Lenny was simply very tired, completely exhausted. He probably fell asleep there, right on the tracks, didn't make it home, sat down for a second to rest and passed out. That's how Valerie became a young widow. She grieved heavily for the loss of her husband. Along with him, her hopes for a strong, large family, her own apartment, old age with a loved one nearby disappeared. And in this difficult period of her life, Val suddenly realized that she was expecting a child. The news made the woman happy and upset at the same time. She was happy because Leonard, it turned out, hadn't disappeared without a trace. He would live on in their child. This news upset the future mother for many reasons. First, Leonard didn't get to know that they were going to have a baby. It was bitter and unfair. He would have been so happy. He would have glowed with happiness. Second, how would she manage alone? Valerie's salary was barely enough for herself, and now a baby. That was quite a situation. After crying from joy, anxiety, and a whole host of other emotions that overwhelmed her, Valerie pulled herself together. She would manage. It was okay. She wasn't completely alone. She had parents in the village. They would help. But the death of her husband was not the only blow fate had prepared for Val. Her parents. Val's mother and father. A tragedy also happened to them. There was a short circuit in their old house. The wooden dwelling burst into flames like a match, and Val's parents couldn't get out. Both died. Valerie couldn't believe that all this was really happening to her. First her beloved husband, now her parents. No home, no loving and loved ones nearby. Val was left completely alone in this uncomfortable and, as it seemed then, hostile world. The young woman didn't want to drink or eat. She automatically went to work simply because she was used to it. She ate, it seemed, even talked to someone. But during this time, it seemed to Val that what was happening around her was just a terrible dream, not real. Sometimes people seemed like actors to her, and houses, furniture, trees, other details of the setting, cardboard decorations. Val saw herself as if from the outside. There were no tears, only a persistent heaviness in her soul. Sometimes panic would suddenly wash over her, making it difficult to breathe. Val would gasp for air, colored spots before her eyes, gradually obscuring the surrounding world. Then it would pass, and a strange apathy would set in again. Valerie lived like this for about 2 months. The feeling of total loneliness and uselessness became almost habitual. Before, her parents and husband loved her, and Val, in turn, doted on her loved ones. And now? Why was she even living in this world now? Unpleasant thoughts began to visit the woman. What if she ended this meaningless existence? It wasn't difficult, just... Well, why should she stay here? What for? For whom? It was precisely at this difficult moment for Valerie that she felt the first movements of the child under her heart. Cautious, timid kicks that no mother would ever mistake for anything else. Val had almost forgotten that she was pregnant. So much had fallen upon her. But she wasn't alone. Her baby would be born soon, Leonard's child. Perhaps he would look like him. Val really hoped so. From then on, the woman pulled herself together. She suddenly clearly realized that she would soon be a mother. This meant she had to hold on for the baby. A child. He was innocent of anything. He was so fragile, so vulnerable. He needed someone to lean on in this crazy world. And that person would be her, Val. The woman seemed to wake up from a deep, terrible dream and set about her affairs. There wasn't much time left until the birth. Many questions and problems still needed to be resolved. First, shake out the insurance money for the burned house. This amount should be just enough for the time Val couldn't work, if she economized, of course. Second, she needed to get all the necessary documents at the prenatal clinic. Third, it was time to start collecting the baby's layette. A child needed so much. A stroller, a crib, diapers, undershirts. All these tasks and worries distracted Valerie from heavy thoughts. She began to enjoy life again. The woman eagerly awaited the baby's arrival. She wanted to look at the familiar face, see familiar features of her husband and parents in it, feel that she was not alone anymore. Valerie, in her desire to save as much money as possible for maternity leave, worked until late in her pregnancy. She washed floors, doing the only thing she knew how to do well. She had to carry heavy buckets of water, bend down, reach. As a result, labor began a little early. Val didn't expect this. Nothing, as they say, foretold it. Anyway, an ambulance was called for the young cleaner right at work. She went to the maternity hospital from there. Several hours of torment, and her treasure, a tiny girl, was placed on the chest of the new mother. The baby looked strange. She was wrinkled and somehow purple. The tiny one was immediately taken to the premature nursery. For some time, Val didn't know what was wrong with her girl. The doctors didn't say anything clearly, just brushed her off. Anything can happen. "What do you want, mother? You didn't carry to term." The head nurse answered Val's questions irritably. "They don't take care of themselves first, and then they suffer." What Val went through during those days until her baby's condition stabilized. She had never been so scared. The woman prayed for only one thing, that her girl would survive. Nothing else mattered. If there were any health problems, it was nothing. They would manage everything. The main thing was that the baby lived. Valerie definitely wouldn't have endured another loss now. And Sarah survived. Moreover, she was discharged from the hospital as a completely healthy child, without any diagnoses. Only her low weight reminded of her prematurity. Val thought she would fatten her daughter up, but she remained fragile, almost transparent. However, this even looked beautiful and touching. Sarah, as Valerie had hoped, greatly resembled her father. She had the same clear eyes, was smiling and charming. At times, Lenny's features were so distinct in the baby that it seemed to the woman as if her husband himself was looking at her. This made her feel warmer and brighter inside. It was hard for Valerie alone with a nursing infant. Until Sarah was 2.5 years old and went to nursery school, Val couldn't work. Money was only enough for the bare necessities: apartment rent, food, minimal clothing. Sometimes Sarah would get sick, then she had to spend money on medicine. Valerie's savings were rapidly dwindling. State benefits were minimal. And yet the young mother felt happy. She had a daughter, a wonderful girl, smart and beautiful, her pride and joy. Val felt needed and loved again. They say that other people's children grow up quickly. Val saw for herself that this statement also applied to her own offspring. Time flew with dizzying speed. Now Sarah was going to kindergarten. From a tiny baby, she had turned into a princess girl with lush pigtails. A scene change. And Sarah was a first grader. Val still remembered how she cried at the assembly line, sending her daughter to school. She felt sorry for the child. Now a lot was required of her little girl, sitting through long lessons, doing homework. What if Sarah had mean teachers who would scold her? Val had had exactly such teachers in middle school. Sarah, on the contrary, glowed with happiness at the assembly line. She couldn't wait to grow up, become an adult and independent, to help her mother. The girl saw how hard it was for Val, how her back and legs ached after work. A few more years flew by as if in a fog, and now Sarah was a high school student. The girl wasn't very good at studying. She tried, Val saw it, but nothing worked out. The woman wasn't upset and certainly didn't shame her daughter. Neither Val herself nor Leonard could boast of academic success. So why be surprised? That wasn't the main thing anyway. Sarah grew up kind, sensitive, attentive, and very wise. In terms of household matters, by her teenage years, she already knew how to save money and could cook a delicious dinner or lunch with a minimal amount. This was more important for life than the ability to solve complex equations. And what a beauty Sarah turned out to be. Slender, big-eyed, fair-skinned. Guys turned their heads after the girl. Sarah herself didn't notice it, but Val saw it and was proud of her girl. If only she got a good husband. That meant a lot to a woman. Sarah finished construction technical school and got a job. Her crew consisted mostly of young girls like herself. Nothing complicated was required of them, just cleaning objects after the workers had finished there. Val was happy for her daughter. Yes, Sarah's work didn't require high qualifications, the pay wasn't that attractive, but at least Sarah was employed, and her work wasn't that physically difficult and exhausting. And then Sarah fell in love. Valerie understood it immediately by her daughter's eyes, by her mysterious smile. Later, Sarah herself confessed that yes, there was such a young man. Wonderful, his name was Michael, and their relationship seemed to be getting serious. When Sarah described her chosen one to her mother, she became thoughtful. He was out of her league. A student of a prestigious university, the son of a quite wealthy mother. Sarah wouldn't fit in well in such a family. Sarah, of course, was beautiful and hardworking, but the levels of the groom and bride were too uneven. But Sarah convinced her mother that everything would be fine between her and Michael. It seemed the young man was genuinely in love with the young beauty, even talked about marriage. True, first he wanted to acquire his own housing, and for that, he needed to spend several years abroad. Even then, Val suspected something. She didn't like it. The woman thought that Michael was just fooling her daughter, would play around for a bit and then leave, go abroad to have fun, forget Sarah, while she would wait for him and suffer alone. She was naive, believed everything, so guileless. And so Michael left. And then it turned out that Sarah was expecting his child. What a surprise! Valerie insisted on terminating the pregnancy. She didn't believe that Michael would acknowledge the child. And the two women couldn't manage on their own. They were barely making ends meet. Most likely, the young man had already forgotten about Sarah, while she naively believed he would be thrilled by the news. Unreasonable child! Valerie shook her head. I told her to give up her fantasies. Michael hung on her every word. But my daughter stood her ground, said you would be happy to hear such news. True, my girl didn't know how to tell you everything. Your phone was unreachable. You didn't answer letters. All this convinced me even more that you had simply run away from Sarah and cut all ties. I didn't know who was involved in all this. I only guessed later. Everything finally fell into place only now, after talking to you. I wrote to Sarah too. I wrote often, Michael choked out. There were problems with communication here then, but I wrote her letters every evening, and it was she who didn't answer. No wonder, Val smirked. Your mother. She, apparently, intercepted your letters and hers, didn't let you communicate. She really didn't like the future daughter-in-law, the simple girl. How do you know? Michael breathed out. I guessed. It's a pity I didn't guess sooner. Wait, you'll understand soon enough. Listen. Receiving no response from her beloved, Sarah decided to have a conversation with his mother. Of course, your mother wasn't thrilled about this meeting. Upon learning of Sarah's pregnancy, she became furious. First, she screamed at my girl, accusing her of trying to deceive everyone, to fleece the young man's wealthy relatives for money. Then she threatened to take the child, as he would be left with a mother who had no money to her name, and not even her own corner. Of course, the prosperous father of the baby would be given custody, and Sarah would be deprived of all rights to her son or daughter. Michael's mother said many hurtful words to Sarah. She stood there half dead with fear. Sarah was seriously afraid for the child then. She already loved him and was afraid of losing her tiny one. What if Michael's mother really carried out her threats? What if she took the baby? It was then that Sarah understood she needed to leave the city, far away from this terrible woman who seemed capable of anything. And Michael. He, as the girl thought then, wouldn't support her anymore. According to your mother, you had forgotten all about Sarah, Valerie continued. She said you already had a girlfriend there, and that in your conversations you didn't even ask about Sarah, but only shared happy details of your new life. This seemed quite plausible. And based on her words, I also thought that's how it would all turn out. Sarah came back after that conversation all in tears. She sobbed, begged her mother to move. She wanted to hide. Sarah regretted her action. It was in vain that she went to Michael's mother then. Nothing good came of it. Only trouble. Well, we moved, Valerie sighed. We settled here, in Severovo. And why not? Nothing held us in Petrovsk. No place of our own. No good job. So, at least in that regard, my daughter and I were free. Sarah wanted to hide so badly. She was very afraid that your mother would carry out her threats and take the child. I didn't believe it, of course, but for my daughter's peace of mind, I agreed. And here we are. Mother and daughter quickly settled into their new place. This town was much smaller than Petrovsk, so in some ways, life was even easier for the small family here. Prices were lower, the atmosphere was calmer. Stephen was born exactly on time, a healthy, strong baby. Grandmother and mother doted on the tiny one. He reciprocated. It seemed Stephen understood from infancy how difficult things were for his loved ones, and therefore was an almost ideal child. He slept a lot, ate well, wasn't capricious, obeyed his grandmother and mother. Everything would have been fine, but the family didn't have much money. Valerie and Sarah worked as cleaners. Both earned pennies that were barely enough for the bare necessities: apartment rent, food, minimal clothing. Stephen had no expensive toys, no gadgets, no fashionable clothes, but he never complained or demanded anything from his mother and grandmother. On the contrary, he assured them that when he grew up, he would buy them everything. Well, we lived not richly, but happily and peacefully, Valerie continued, tears welling up in her eyes. And then tragedy. With Sarah. Like a bolt from the blue. She got sick, didn't go to the doctor, kept working, walked around with a fever, worked with cold water washing floors. She hid her condition from me until the last moment. I wouldn't have let her go to work, although we desperately needed the money. I noticed when she was already completely bedridden. I called an ambulance. Sarah went to the hospital. It immediately turned out to be bilateral pneumonia, already advanced. They couldn't save her. So Stephen and I were left alone. Valerie had experienced many losses in her years, but what happened to Sarah hit her the hardest. Perhaps if it weren't for Stephen, the elderly woman wouldn't have survived. But she had to stay strong for her grandson. And Valerie pulled herself together. She worked again, cleaned again, and cooked lunches and dinners, and also supported her grandson. It wasn't easy for him either. It was no joke, to be left without a mother at 8 years old. The old woman's speech flowed smoothly, like a river. Michael was overwhelmed by various feelings. His heart ached that Sarah was now lost forever. Yes, he had gotten used to living without her, but Michael knew she was somewhere, alive, feeling something, laughing, maybe even remembering him sometimes. And now it turned out, this was what had happened. But on the other hand, it seemed Michael had found a son. After all, Stephen, by all accounts, turned out to be his child, his and Sarah's, their continuation, their future. Why didn't Sarah turn to me for help even in the most difficult times? Michael choked out. She knew where to find me. I wasn't hiding and didn't even change my place of residence. I was in Petrovsk the whole time. We were afraid. Valerie sighed. Your mother. She made it clear that if we made any claims, she would sue for the child. How were we to know that you wouldn't be on her side? That's why we hid. How could she think that I... Michael didn't finish. Tears overwhelmed him, but he didn't want to cry now, on the bench in front of Sarah's mother. Don't judge. Valerie gently patted the man's shoulder. We were afraid for Stevie, you understand? And fear is a bad counselor. And Sarah was offended by you at first because you found someone else there. And then she often looked at your photos on social media, where you were with different girls. But I didn't have anyone there, on the internship, Michael exclaimed. I worked like Papa Carlo just to earn enough for an apartment as quickly as possible, to live together with Sarah, happily, peacefully. That's how fate is. Valerie shook her head. Fate, you know, is quite a swindler. And even now, what was the probability that we would meet here? Practically zero. And yet here we are, sitting on a bench, talking. I want to see my son, Michael suddenly said. Stevie. Yours. He is mine, isn't he? He's yours, Valerie smiled. You'll see the boy, and all doubts will disappear. Grandma? Hi. Where are you from? A slightly hoarse boy's voice was heard from behind Michael. The man turned sharply and saw a tall, thin teenager. It was as if lightning struck him. This child. He was the spitting image of Michael from his childhood photos, only dressed and haircut differently. The teenager looked at Michael with distrust. And here comes Stevie. Valerie smiled. Finished work already? Yes, that's why I came. They paid me well. Let's go home. You don't need to stand here anymore today. Stephen didn't seem to understand yet that Michael wasn't a random passerby. Stop. Valerie suddenly hesitated. I want to introduce you to a good person here. This is Michael. Uncle Michael. I'm your father, Michael stated directly and without any preparation. The words just came out of his mouth. He didn't like this Uncle Michael. What kind of uncle was he to Stephen? You... The boy's eyes widened in surprise. His eyebrows shot up to his fringe. Of course, the confession shocked the young man. but somewhere deep in his eyes, joy and relief flickered. Several years passed. Valerie and Stephen now lived in Petrovsk again. Michael bought them an apartment next to his. It would be more correct to say that all three of them lived together, as one family. Michael still wasn't talking to his mother. Then, after the chance meeting with Valerie and meeting Stephen, the man returned to Petrovsk and immediately went to his parent. They had a long and difficult conversation. His mother, of course, didn't expect such a turn of events. And who could have thought? She didn't know what happened to Sarah afterward. She wasn't even interested in whether the child had been born. The woman had believed all these years that she had done the right thing, saved her only child from a greedy poor girl, prevented her from ruining her son's fate. At first, his mother denied it, didn't want to confess that she had once acted so disgustingly towards Sarah, and didn't mention the intercepted letters. That old woman told you a pack of lies to foist her grandson onto you, and you just fell for it. And this boy, the probability that he's your son is minimal. Michael could have argued a lot against these words. Stevie was his. There was no doubt about that now. Michael even had an official paper confirming his relationship with the boy. The man had ordered a DNA test almost immediately. Not because he doubted anything. Stevie was too much like himself as a child. It was simply that this test was needed for official adoption, and Michael, of course, intended to take Stevie under his wing. The boy had already lived in conditions not very suitable for a child for so many years. Now that would end. Michael then begged his mother for a long time to tell him the truth. She avoided answering, so by the woman's behavior, he guessed everything himself. But then his mother finally burst out. She called Sarah and Valerie names, described the prospects of a terrible future for her son if he had tied his fate to that poor girl. Michael looked at his mother and tightly pressed his lips together. His dearest, closest person. She had dedicated her whole life to him, done so much for her only son, helped him make something of himself. And it was his mother herself who had once destroyed his happiness with her own hands. Michael tried not to think about what would have happened if, upon returning, he had found Sarah in Petrovsk. Stephen would have been about 2 years old then. Of course, they would have gotten married, bought the apartment they had dreamed of, and lived happily. In a couple of years, Stephen would have had a brother or sister. Sarah would have been alive. Michael hadn't spoken to his mother for about 2 years now, but he wasn't the initiator of this silence. His mother herself was offended by him. She was deeply outraged that her son didn't appreciate her contribution to his own future. And she also tried to forbid him, an adult established man, from communicating with Stephen and Valerie. Upon learning that her son was going to formalize paternity for the boy, the woman became furious. "What are you doing? Have you completely lost your mind? You're going to saddle yourself with your mistress's son, and his grandmother too. How do you know whose he is? Who knows what genes the boy has? You'd be better off marrying a decent woman with a child, if you want a family so much." She said many unpleasant and angry words about Stephen and Valerie. Michael tried to calm his mother, to explain his view of the situation. It was useless. The elderly woman reacted to any mention of her grandson like a bull to a red rag. She lost her temper, became irritated, swore. Michael felt sorry for his mother, but he wasn't going to abandon his child to satisfy her whims, especially since he and his son had immediately taken to each other soulfully. And so his mother was offended and stopped communicating with Michael. He periodically made attempts at reconciliation. He knew that sooner or later his parent, despite her firm, stubborn character, would soften. And for now, he had plenty to do anyway. They had so much to catch up on with Stephen. Son and father now often went on vacation, sometimes to the sea, sometimes to the mountains. The teenager sincerely admired the world around him, so eagerly absorbing new impressions. Son and father talked a lot. Stephen turned out to be an interesting and wise interlocutor beyond his years. And now, when the boy didn't have to work, his studies improved. In the prestigious gymnasium where Michael enrolled his son, he quickly became one of the best students. Valerie was also always there. And how could it be otherwise? She had raised Stephen for so many years. Grandmother and grandson had become the closest and dearest people to each other. Of course, they couldn't be separated. Michael's personal life also improved. Finally, he met a woman who was interesting and close to him in spirit. She didn't resemble the flighty beauties with whom Michael often had romances in his past life. Irene worked as an accountant. She was raising a son from her first marriage alone, the same age as Stephen. The boys quickly found common ground, which was great. Now those were guys! Michael smiled, watching the teenagers eagerly discussing something or repairing a bicycle together. It seemed they would all become a strong, friendly family. Irene immediately became friends with Stephen, and with Valerie too. Peace, harmony, tranquility, mutual support. Michael felt warm and lighthearted. And his mother would understand everything in time. She herself was already unhappy with her own stubbornness. Michael noticed it. Sooner or later, his mother would thaw. That time was not far off. No one held a grudge against her anymore. It was just that his mother, perhaps, found it difficult to understand this. Never mind, everything would work out.